So, Will, welcome to the Masterclass series. I can't believe it's taken us so long to get you here.
I know, and I'm very honoured to finally be interviewed by you, because usually it's the other way around.
Quite right. I'm looking forward to sending you a few curveballs during this conversation as well.
I
spent a
appreciate
lot of
it.
time actually researching what I'm going to ask you.
Oh, God.
But no, on a serious note, being a masterclass, this episode, as indeed all the masterclass episodes, are about providing our students with a chance to talk about their research and what they've done and why they've done what they've done. And I would like to ask you this first question, which is, of all the topics you were able to choose for your final project, why did you choose the topic of community of practice?
I guess at the time, one of the things I kept asking myself was, what was the underlying problem that I was trying to solve? And I guess to cast our minds back to, I think it was 2018, 2019, it was the start of COVID. And, we were all experiencing lockdowns and feeling a sense of isolation, and normality had just been completely disrupted. All of a sudden, we're working from home. And I thought, okay, so if we're all becoming more and more siloed in the organisation at Consalia, how can I be brilliant at communicating? One, within Consalia itself, with my colleagues, and the other with our customers. But I didn't want to just address the notion of communication. I felt like it went far deeper than just communication. And so it was really, I spent a long time kind of reading around this subject, and it brought me to start thinking about the notion of, well, it's a community, isn't it? It's a community of practice. And it's actually one of our, he was my mentor at the time, but I know he's incredibly close to you as well, was Peter Critton. And Peter Critton is passionate around the notion of the masters in general. And he always took an interest in what I was researching and how I was applying it, my research at work. And when I was talking to him about, I'm exploring this notion of community of practice, I didn't realize that he was one of the thought leaders on it, and it aligned very much to what his passion is. And together we thought, God, we have a brilliant opportunity in my position at Consalia, but also the very nature of what Consalia does to really start constructing what a community of practice could look like for Consalia and the sales profession as a whole. So that really did pique my interest. But I felt like there was a lot of diverging factors that were at play that also made it quite important for me personally. As well, and just because it was community of practice that I was interested in. But I also wanted to explore the notion of belonging, and how does belonging affect a community of practice. And there was no part of me that, when it came to that final project time, I thought, this is my project title. It was really doing my literature review, reading around the subject a lot. I kind of wanted to find my niche to operate in. So I looked at the notion of belonging, how that affected community of practices as a whole. And I felt belonging was really important. And I'm sure we'll go further into it, but I felt at the time when, as I said, people were isolated, people were disconnected, working from home during the pandemic, that belonging was more important than ever.
Yeah, so it's interesting sort of reading over your master's dissertation again after a period of time. And I
Yeah.
just wonder whether the results of your research would be different now to then because of the context of the environment that you've referred to just now has sort of changed a lot.
Yeah, I think to a degree it would have changed. I think, obviously, as we all know, life has moved on. People, even during COVID, there was that explosion of technology that kind of enabled people to stay better connected. It wasn't like that in the first 6 months, whilst I was doing my research. I feel if you were to apply the same kind of question to today's environment, I think we would still try and find better ways of communicating. And maybe the need for it is slightly different than it was back then, but I still think it remains as relevant now than it ever did. To give you a bit of context around, what we do, I know you're the CEO, so this sounds a bit weird, but maybe for the audience, as a sales business school, we work with so many employers, so many sales leaders and undergraduate apprenticeships, all specializing in sales. Now, our team of project directors, for example, are the face of Consalia. They are teaching them the frameworks, the knowledge, the toolkits to enable them to succeed in this world. They are at the coal face of understanding the challenges that our customers are going through. Now, for me, in my role as head of sales, I am so keen to understand what our customers are going through. Like every salesperson out there in B2B sales, they want to understand what their customers are going through so that we can provide value in the solutions that we suggest. Everyone's got no time. So the engagements that we have with our customers have to be value added. And so if we can provide solutions based on insight through what our students are going through, then that is a great opportunity. And I think that's just something that we can continue to strive for within Consalia.
So just to perhaps for the listener to kind of have some sort of context. So Consalia has a core team of people that are on its payroll and salaried employees, both based in the UK as well as in Australia. But we also have these program tutors, which are not necessarily on the core team, but they're people that work extremely closely, with our students. And so I guess one of the things that you went through is defining, as far as your research is concerned and Consalia, who is our community?
Yeah.
And this is a group of people that aren't necessarily part of the core team, but they're terribly important for what we do.
Yeah.
And wanting to embrace them in this research program that you've done.
Exactly. So you kind of, you've raised a really good point, is how a community of practice can be deployed almost. And I think most organizations in itself, they are communities. They're communities of practice because you have everyone operating within that social network within the organization and sharing knowledge, communicating, collaborating with one another. Now, the other kind of angle is creating a community of practice for the sales community as a whole. So going back to your previous question, I think when I initially sought to do my project, I was very much focused all around how we can advance the idea of sharing knowledge internally within Consalia. Now, how I see a shift, or if I was to apply the same project now, I think it would be around how can we elevate sales as a whole. Trying to address the greater we. How can we create a community for sales leaders, sales practitioners, to advance this notion of sales professionalism? This is something that we care deeply around. That's our vision. And we actually have a brilliant platform that we can do it.
Absolutely. So I think we've now spoken about some of the context. So and it would be interesting, perhaps, if you could define what is a community of practice.
Yeah, and I think maybe we should have started with that question, because so far people might be thinking, well, what on earth is it? So a community of practice was a term that a chap called Etienne Wenger came up with through his research with a lady called Jean Lave. I can never pronounce these academic surnames, but in the 90s. And it was essentially they were exploring how people learn, and then how people can make implicit knowledge explicit. And then what is the meaning behind it? What does that give other people? But in a nutshell, a community of practice is a group of people who share a common interest or profession and come together to learn, collaborate, and share knowledge and experiences. And it's a way to foster ongoing learning and development, and promotes collaboration and build a supported network. So that's it in a nutshell. It's a meaty subject.
It is, and I think that must admit, when you sort of talk about communities of practice, you've got communities and practice. Those are the two key words, aren't they? So the practice element is about the learning, and the community is about the people that would engage in the learning.
Yeah, I mean, the whole notion and what makes a community of practice work is the participatory nature of it.
Yeah.
Okay, so without people communicating, you're not going to have a community of practice. It will have a label, perhaps, but it won't exist because it's not being participated within. So communities, just like any business or like any function, it requires that social network to the social construct whereby people want to participate in that and to share things with that. And it can, like the definition suggests, it can be, and you can look at it in three different lenses. It can be at an organizational level. It could be at a team's level. It could just be how you operate across different functions within an organization, say. So there might be really small community or practices where there's only 2 or 3 people in an organization, but you share the same passion. And that results in you communicating with one another because you share that passion. So you can look at a community of practice through different lenses. And I think that's exciting as well.
Why do you think it's so important? And I know that when you started your research project, you sort of related it very much, we're in the pandemic and it was obvious. But why do you think this is such an important topic for organizations to kind of become familiar with and to embrace?
Yeah, we could spend a lot of time, and there's a lot of evidence that maybe I'll touch upon to say why organizations should really nurture this. From a personal point of view, whilst I was doing the Masters, I felt so fulfilled. I felt as if I was really I was just loving the learning, loving the development that was giving me. I am now a big advocate, and I know a lot of our students are still, of lifetime learning. You know, we talk in the masters around having a growth mindset. For me, that was such a, it takes, it's such a small part of the masters in module 2, but it has had such a profound impact on the way I view learning and the way I therefore view how I conduct my professional practice. And being, you know, advocating this kind of lifetime learning attitude, I want to be part of a organization that also embraces learning. And of course we do, we're a sales business school, but how we apply that within our roles, how we ensure we are continually progressing, even if we're not doing a master's. How can we learn? How can we continuously learn in order to develop? That's what so excites me. And I think so many of our students feel like that as well. And we have students like Rainer, who, you know, and David Norris, who is on my cohort, who, you know, they've reached a point in their careers where you can sort of say, you know, they're operating at a very senior level. They're still doing the masters. These guys are advocates of lifetime learning. It's the only way we can progress. So, yeah, I don't know, did I answer your question?
You answered part of it. You've talked about it from a personal level, but I don't know whether you were going to go on to talk about it from an organizational level.
Yeah.
You know, is there any evidence from your research that kind of points to the reasons why companies should embrace and foster the sense of community to practice?
Yes, well, I will come on to that. So yeah, it is really important. So there's, from a really sort of, from a softer angle, as opposed to the, well, what does it mean to have a greater sense of learning, like knowledge and understanding in a given role? There's that angle as well. But I'll start with the softer angle. Being part of a community of practice, there's a huge amount of evidence to suggest that it is a real motivator. You know, when people feel like they belong, they are working towards a purpose. They are developing a greater sense of identity of themselves in that role, which is a motivating factor. The counter argument of that is that nowadays, and I've read somewhere, and please don't quote me on this if you're listening to the podcast, I don't have it to hand, but something like 55% of people feel like they don't belong in their organizations. And that leads to people wanting to leave. It makes them demotivated. They are not contributing to their organizations in the way that perhaps their, you know, management leadership team want them to. So from that sense, from a motivational sense, it's really important. From a identity sense, you know, being part of something is really important, especially I think for someone like myself who is, you know, developing, I hope, in my own career, forming an identity around it is really important as well, because how you perceive yourself and how other people perceive you is hugely important, especially when it comes to sales leadership, which is, you know, what the Masters was all about. So developing that sense of identity. And then the other thing, which I think we just touched upon, is around communication. And I am sure it's not just Consalia, but it's every single organization. Everyone sits on top of implicit knowledge. They think, oh, I know this. That means everyone else should know it. And rarely is that the case. And so how do you develop these channels, these networks, these this way of being where communication becomes king? You know, it doesn't. You might disagree with what's being communicated, or you might agree with it. But the worst thing is if it is stored implicitly in people, because the way the world is changing so much, because the way industries are rapidly advancing, there needs to be a level of agility that companies need to respond to this ever-changing world, and communication is key for that. You need to have agile teams.
Would
and
you
things
say
like
that communication is the prerequisite for building a community of practice, or do you think a community of practice will lead to communication?
I think they complement each other. You know, there are many organizations that, or, you know, operating within any organizations, you might have sub-teams that are communicating with one another on a regular basis. It might not be labeled as a community of practice, but in fact, it is. It is because people are participating in that conversation. I think as long as people come together in order to solve a problem, in order to work towards a vision, in order to find a solution, you know, you are developing a community of practice. Mm-hmm. Now, whether that's large or small, you know, you could argue that for Consalia, trying to you know, our vision is to help make sales the world's most sought after profession. Now, we can't do that alone. We need other people to buy into that vision. And we need to be talking as a community together in order to, how do we make that happen?
I was rather surprised at some of your research findings, because of course, you know, when you start to talk about belonging and you start to talk about communication, you know, part of your journey was actually looking at how well Consalia does it.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you could share what your research findings are, as far as, you know, where people felt on a spectrum of belonging and where people felt on the spectrum of being included.
Yeah, that part of research was really, I didn't know what to expect, because in my role, you know, I don't need to, I don't kind of have that much crossover with different teams. But as part of my research, I felt the need to interview everyone within Consalia. And we're only a small business, so it kind of was manageable for the masters. And it really varied quite a lot. You had some of my research findings where people were completely bought in to Consalia, to what we stand for, and they were highly kind of engaged with what we're doing. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you had some of those people that were completely disengaged. And what was interesting was the stark sort of opposites, as it were, of those that felt really engaged were participating, essentially. They were really trying to move the marker to, you know, achieve what Consalia's vision and goals are. And then at the bottom of the spectrum, you had those that, that weren't engaged at all. And I'm just going to read out some of these words that kind of came out. through the research, so people at the kind of back end of the spectrum felt isolated, felt undervalued, felt alone, felt lonely, felt fear, detached, confused, disempowered, separated. So really kind of negative connotations. On the positive side, those that were kind of at the top end were saying things like they felt a real camaraderie, a real, they felt inspired, they felt purpose-led, they felt receptive, they were accepted. And so I think, you know, when you look at the words that people use to describe how they felt, it kind of hits home that there's a real responsibility, I think, at a human level, to really keep people engaged.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I think sort of given the fact that we're, like you said earlier on, a sort of a reasonably small business, not a large business. Were you surprised that there were still, in a company the size we are, that there were such polar opposites?
Well, yeah, because if I felt that, then I don't think I would stick around.
Yeah.
I felt, yeah, I felt, it was one of those moments in the Masters where we look at Covey, and I struggled with this at the time, and you look at your circle of influence, and you look at your circle of concern. Now, because I interviewed everyone in the business, there were certainly people that I could influence, certainly those that sit within my team. But where it became difficult was when I wasn't, you know, where they were in a different team. Mm. What could I do in my role to address how they might be feeling? And I felt that was a really tricky one to navigate, because, you know, in the Masters you look at your own values, you look at leadership, you look at how you are living your values and why is that important. At the same time, you got Stephen Covey saying, well, you know, focus on your circle of influence rather than your circle of concern. And it's one of these ones where I think is, you know, there were certain responses that didn't that sit within my circle of concern. I couldn't really do anything about it. That doesn't mean to say I didn't want to do something. It was just very difficult to do.
So I suppose if you're going to build up a strong community of practice, coming back to what you said earlier about the I, the we, and the greater we, that what you are kind of bringing to the fore is the challenge, perhaps, of developing or a community of practice so that it expands across different departments or different silos.
Yeah.
And so you move away from sort of departmental community of practice to a organizational one, which is, I know, something that Peter Critton was incredibly passionate about.
He was, and so I do want to make that really stark difference. So when I was doing my research, I was looking at it from the organizational development kind of perspective, and kind of what I was alluding to just now or earlier. The sense of developing a community of practice for the sales profession is something that certainly sits within my circle of influence. Okay. So it's interesting, like how even if you, how challenging it can be within to do anything OD from an OD point of view in an organization, you're going to come up with so many different challenges. And that's what I felt in my master's. So if I was to do it again, focusing it on the sales profession as a whole, how can we create a community of practice for the sales profession?
Sounds like a PhD topic coming up here, Will. So I think the next cohort is starting quite soon.
Yeah. 2 kids, 2 under 2. I'm not there yet.
They're not quite there yet.
Yeah.
Really interesting. So what were your key takeaways from your master's project? What were the key learnings?
I think it is having a heightened level of awareness around how you are, your being within an organization, and the things that you can do within your power to cultivate a sense of value, purpose, respectfulness, support, involvement. These words are so important.
These are the words that came from your research.
These are the words that came from my research.
As to what gave people a sense of belonging to a community?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And by living these sort of values, let's say, for want of a better word, you are going to create a sense of community.
So could you go through those words again, the key words for building?
So sharing, like what's going on in your world. You know, it might not be relevant for someone else, but it might be. It might strike an idea. You're sharing your knowledge with someone else. Just that alone is really important. By sharing, you are enabling people to feel valued. You know, why? Even you could relate it to a classroom, or you could relate it to grabbing a coffee with someone. You know, someone is sharing something that is meaningful to them, and that gives you a sense of feeling valued. Mm-hmm. When you feel valued, it changes your perspective. Again, that adds to togetherness, to support. So, you know, understanding what people are going through, you know, whether it's coming up to the end of the quarter, big results to hit, or what's going on in someone's personal life, you know, if they're going through a lot. And I think during COVID that was, you know, evident throughout, something that we were really aware of. But having a sense of, having that sense of awareness enables you to support someone better. And sharing that is, I mean, for me, it all just comes down to sharing. And that creates a sense of belonging, and then that sense of belonging drives the purpose, the motivation, the engagement, and can you see the link? That is then therefore going to help develop a community.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Can I sort of connect some other themes around community of practice?
Yeah. Are these your curveball questions?
Yes, I think I might. It's not really a curveball question, but it's a connection between the community of practice sharing knowledge and social capital. Yeah, so I came across this TED talk, which is all about performance, actually. But the beginning of the TED talk talked about this bit of research that was conducted by William Muir of Purdue University. It was published in 2015. And it was based on an experiment with chickens. Yeah. And what he did was he segregated chickens based on the number of eggs that they produced. So you could say in the sales world, you could segregate your salespeople according to the amount of sales results they produced. And he grouped average egg-laying chickens together, and he put the prolific egg-laying chickens together in what he called a super chicken group. And he kept these chickens in their separate groups for 2 generations. And he found that the average chickens were doing just fine, and they were being quite productive and producing eggs. But in the super chickens group, they found that only 3 survived, and that the group had pecked each other to death in the super group.
Right.
And the interesting sort of conclusions from this was the connection between high performers, and high performers and normal performers, and and basically was saying that the social connectedness that you had in the average group of chickens ended up producing much better results than the super performers were doing. And so I'm thinking about this in the context of communities of practice. In the sense of relating, sales is quite an individualistic profession, and we tend to, and it encourages us to be individualistic. We have our own targets to reach, and we're measured on the performance of those targets. And we're looking at this community of practice concept. And I suppose it's more a question, or it's a sort of thing for us to talk about, is that if we were to look at sales teams as being a community of practice, does the way in which you share information, the way in which you learn, the way in which you have a shared purpose, could that supersede the need to reward salespeople based on performance, for example? Would you get more out of a community of practitioners, salespeople in sales teams, by focusing on all of the positive aspects of communities of practice that you've identified, rather than encouraging individualistic kind of behavior that could be driven by, sales targets and a culture of fear, which a lot of sales managers practice. So I'm just thinking that there could be some connections between these 2 trains of thought.
I mean, there's quite a few things to pick apart in what you've just said, which is quite funny. But to some extent, I think, so operating in sales can be, I think you used the words, can be quite a lonely or isolated place, because, you are ultimately trying to achieve a result. If you don't achieve it, then you fear your job. I mean, the counter point to that is sales is actually the most sociable of all the roles, because you are having to interact with customers and also influence internal stakeholders to kind of deliver for your customers as well. So there's that's kind of side of it. The other thing you kind of mentioned was how sales teams can you reward based on sharing, and I think you mentioned something about the kind of the behavior of salespeople. But I think we have this discussion a lot. When you compensate sales teams based on results, that influences behavior an awful lot. So I think there is an argument where there needs to be, I mean, this sounds so boring, but there needs to be a balance, right? You need to reward behavior. People come to sales because it can be lucrative, and that's the expectation. But at what cost? You know, you also need to develop that a construct somehow, and I'm not sure if anyone's done it really well, where the notion of elevating not just yourself but the whole organization to kind of reach the needs for the market. That's a long-term view on something. That is beyond 1 quarter or 2 quarters. That's, you know, you're looking at a strategic way of working. And so that is where a community or practice should be recognized and nurtured and empowered to do. I mean, we know that, you know, we often talk about the need to be agile at the moment and to be able to capture the marketplace, especially post-COVID, because, you know, we're facing so many headwinds. So the level of innovation that organizations have to do is profound. Now, how are these organizations going to know how to develop and innovate if they are not tackling what people at the front line are hearing from their customers and their challenges that they're facing? I think it's, I mean, I think it both need to be recognized. But yeah, I think
I know it's a bit of a curve. It was not really a curveball, but I think I remember, as the CEO of Consalia and going through the pandemic, and I was really concerned about, what it was going to do for the community that we have.
Yeah.
And very aware that that we had, like most companies, sort of challenges of making sure we had that sense of shared purpose. And I think the results of your survey showed that we were not where we needed to have been along that as a business. And if we as a business have these problems, it's only going to be multiplied with larger companies. And of course, since then, we've had the Great Resignation, which is probably symptomatic of companies not being able to create strong communities of practice.
Yeah. I mean, just a few stats to sort of bring this to life. So you mentioned the Great Resignation. A study by BetterUp found that employees who felt a strong sense of belonging, say, are 3.5 more times likely to stay at their organizations. And then also on the notion of innovation, a study by Deloitte found that inclusive teams are 80% more likely to report high innovation, and 2.3 times more likely to be high performing. So I think that just shows the importance of how we engage with each other from an internal point of view, but how that will also manifest itself externally as well.
So looking to the future, Will, where is your community of practice concept going to take you? Where do you see the potential?
Well, I've dropped a couple of hints. So one of the things that I'm really passionate about doing is launching a community of practice for sales professionals through Consalia. And I think we're in a fantastic position to do it, not only because with some of our customers, there's such a huge amount of research that has already been undertaken within them. And how can we offer the platform to make that knowledge more explicit? How can we share that as as a whole, because I think that's going to be hugely important. For sales professionals, to come together to support one another, to share the challenges that they're facing, but also have a network of people that might have been through it and can offer insight and innovation from it. So I think that's something that I'm really keen to kind of explore and hopefully launch later this year. I think the other one that I'm constantly, I'm keen to refer back to is from my initial project, which is how can we develop from a OD point of view, the channels of communication to inspire innovation. But I do think we're doing well on that already. It's much better than a few years ago.
Well, I remember that one of the things that we tried to set up was sort of using technology to try and foster communication.
Yeah.
And that was probably a failed project, wasn't it? It didn't get off the ground.
It didn't, no. I'm going to contradict myself a little bit here. A lot of the times, the way a community of practice is developed is organically. So whilst you might have a vision, and at the time it was my vision, create better channels of communicating. And I looked at a tech solution at the time because obviously we were all remote. But that didn't solve all the problems. It didn't address the core problem. And in hindsight, it probably was the right product at the wrong time. And I think, sometimes all that is what's needed is going back to that very simple thing of picking up the phone. Let's meet with someone face to face. Let's do it regularly. Let something grow organically. And if people want to be part of that, make it accessible. So
where do you start? Do you start with picking up the phone, or is there a higher order? You talked about purpose, for example, earlier on. Is that something that needs to be in place before, so you have a sort of framework or a reason for people coming together?
Not necessarily. It depends on the challenge that you're trying to solve. So, you might find that you're working on a project, for instance, that is trying to solve a solution for a customer. Now, you might, for a short period of time, want to bring different people together, and you develop that sense of purpose for coming up with a solution for that customer. So, or it could be a broader challenge, like one of how can we better communicate as an organization. That was the challenge that I was trying to solve. It was a really, it goes back to your sphere of influence, sphere of concern, and it's how, how much time, how much, it's not, time is a factor, but it creates, you need to be incredibly proactive, very engaged. It needs to be, a priority number one. And I think, so knowing, perhaps starting small and then growing it outwards is better than starting at a huge scale and then kind of focusing
Very
inwards,
good.
I think. And it's interesting how other organizations are becoming more explicit around this notion of community of practice. Okay. So it's not just me that harps on about it.
No.
Lots of organizations are embracing the theory of it and seeing how important it is. Salesforce is doing it. I think they've got a very engaged platform to create that sense of community. It's called the Sales Enablement Society, and that's a group that they use internally to provide a forum for sales reps to share best practice. HubSpot use one, SAP use one, Oracle use one. So a lot of the SaaS, based companies are using them. As a sales business school, we sit on all that knowledge. Let's make it explicit. So I think, we've got to develop one. Then as an industry, let's bring people together.
But I can see some of the things we're doing with the podcasts that we're running now. Is and particularly the Ask Me Anythings, where we're trying to draw people in. I can see that some of the things that we're doing now hopefully is going to help.
And this is what I wanted to say. It takes time. You go back to this notion of momentum. It's like the podcast, the AMAs, these are people participating. We haven't labeled this a community, but we're seeing people participating. We're seeing people taking part in it, coming back time and time again. They're slowly, this identity is being formed of being part of something. What is it? Like, we don't know yet. But I think it's exciting. And I think from what we've seen with podcasts, with the masterclass, with the AMA sessions, is that people are wanting to connect. And it doesn't necessarily mean they want to connect internally within their organizations. They want to connect with other sales professionals. And that is something that is incredibly exciting.
Great. Well, is there anything else you'd like to share that we haven't yet covered?
Nope. I think that's it.
That's it. Well, thank you very much, Will, for your research, or sharing your research and sharing your findings. And I'm looking forward to how the future is going to develop around the concepts you've been speaking about.
Yeah.
And perhaps we should try another version of the super chickens
and
chickens approach. I think who knows where that might take us.
Yeah. Who knows? Well, thank you.
Thank you, Will.
Cheers.
Okay. Bye-bye.